Let me start by saying this: betrayal is like a poison that seeps into your life slowly, sometimes so subtly you don't even realize it until it's too late. The first time I tasted it was with my ex-wife, Rachel. She didn't just cheat on me, she made sure I found out in the worst possible way. It wasn't some accidental discovery, like stumbling across texts or seeing her out with someone else. No, she orchestrated the whole thing to hurt me as much as possible. We'd been married for 5 years when it happened. Things weren't perfect between us, but I thought we were solid. I loved her deeply, maybe even blindly. Looking back now, I can see the signs: the way she'd pull away during arguments, how she stopped sharing things with me, but at the time, I convinced myself it was just normal relationship stuff. Then one night, after I came home early from a work trip, I walked into our bedroom to find her in bed with my best friend, Mike. They weren't just together, they were laughing about something, like they hadn't a care in the world. When they saw me standing there, frozen in the doorway, Rachel didn't even have the decency to look guilty. Instead, she smirked and said, "What took you so long to figure it out?" That moment broke something inside me. Not just trust, my faith in people, in relationships, in love itself. After the divorce, I swore I'd never let anyone manipulate me again. But life has a funny way of testing those kinds of promises. Fast forward a few years, and enter Betty Martinez, my dad's new wife. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I told myself she couldn't be all bad if Dad had fallen for her. But within weeks of them getting married, it became clear that Betty wasn't interested in being part of our family. She wanted to own it, and she saw me as an obstacle standing in her way. Betty had this incredible talent for making my life miserable while maintaining her perfect stepmom act. She'd accidentally knock my dinner onto the kitchen floor, claiming she didn't even see me standing there. Or she'd dump her coffee grounds and banana peels directly into my bedroom trash can, saying she was just trying to help with chores. One day, I nearly lost half my hair because she'd replaced my shampoo with superglue. Yeah, actual superglue. By the time I realized what she'd done, chunks of my scalp were raw and bleeding. But here's the kicker: whenever my dad walked into the room, Betty transformed. Suddenly, she was Miss Perfect Homemaker, straight out of some old TV show. Every time I tried to tell him how she treated me, she'd laugh it off like I was being ridiculous. "Oh, Ronnie," she'd say in this sweet, innocent voice, "just being dramatic. You know how teenage girls can be." And bless his heart, Dad believed her every word. Betty had this whole gaslighting thing down to an art. She'd bake his favorite chocolate chip cookies while I was at school, eat them all herself, and then tell him I finished the whole batch. She'd shrink my favorite sweaters in the wash and blame the machine like it was some faulty piece of junk. Every little thing she did felt like an accident, or at least that's how she spun it, but deep down, I knew better. Still, after a while, I started questioning myself. Was I overreacting? Was Betty really trying to help, and I was just ungrateful? Looking back now, though, it's clear she was playing a long game. She wanted me out of the picture, plain and simple. The crazy part? She underestimated one big thing: how much my dad truly loved me and how well he actually knew her. That mistake cost her everything. It all started when Dad got his diagnosis: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. For most people, that kind of news would bring families closer together. Not Betty. No, she saw it as her chance to push me further away. First, she convinced Dad to skip my graduation from Lincoln High School. "Ronnie, honey," she cooed, rubbing his shoulders like she was soothing a child, "all that excitement and emotion might be too much stress for your heart. Dr. Harrison specifically said you need to avoid overwhelming situations." Meanwhile, while I was walking across the stage alone, she posted Instagram photos of their romantic weekend getaway to Napa Valley. Heart emojis, hashtags about living your best life. It was disgusting. Then came the next blow. I'd worked my butt off for 4 years to earn a spot at Northwestern University, and I even landed a partial academic scholarship. I was thrilled. This was my ticket to a better future. But Betty? Oh no, she wasn't having any of that. To her, my acceptance letter wasn't a dream, it was $signs flashing in her eyes. She sat Dad down for one of her fake family meetings about our finances. "Ronnie, sweetheart," she said, spreading bank statements across the kitchen table like she was building a case in court, "with these medical bills piling up, I just don't see how we can afford college expenses. Maybe she should consider community college for the first 2 years. It's the responsible choice." Dad looked exhausted and defeated, nodding along as Betty painted this picture of financial ruin. What she conveniently left out, of course, were the 2 brand new Coach purses sitting in her closet, $800 each, that she'd bought that same week, or the weekly spa appointments she'd scheduled for stress management. Apparently, my education was a luxury we couldn't afford, but her designer therapy was essential. I watched my dreams crumble right in front of me while Betty played the role of the caring, practical stepmom who only had the family's best interests at heart. never mind that she'd never worked a day since marrying my dad. Suddenly, she was our financial expert, and Dad was too sick and worn out to see through her lies. But trust me, the real cruelty was still coming. And once it hit, everything else would look like child's play. The real cruelty came when Dad entered hospice care. Betty appointed herself as his primary caregiver and medical advocate, which gave her terrifying power over his final days and over my access to him. "Darling," she'd say, blocking the doorway to Dad's room like a bouncer at an exclusive club, "Dr. Peterson says too many visitors can be overwhelming for terminal patients. I think 15 minutes every other day is plenty, don't you?" Meanwhile, she'd spend entire afternoons camped out in his room, sometimes bringing her book club friends to chat loudly in the hallway about their latest romance novel. During my brief supervised visits, I'd find Dad barely conscious but still trying to squeeze my hand. Betty would hover nearby, checking her Apple Watch and tapping her foot impatiently. "Time's up, sweetheart," she'd say. "He needs to save his energy for physical therapy." Physical therapy for a man who could barely lift his head. The lies were becoming more obvious, but the staff believed her because she was listed as his medical proxy. The worst part was catching her in Dad's room with a stack of legal documents spread across his bedside table. She'd lean over his bed, guiding his shaking hand to sign paper after paper while he drifted in and out of consciousness. When I asked what she was having him sign, Betty's perfect smile never wavered. "Oh, sweetheart, these are just boring grown-up things like medical directives and insurance forms," she said quickly, shuffling the papers into her designer tote bag. "You're too young to understand responsibilities like estate planning and property management. These are conversations for adults." I tried staying overnight once, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair just to be near Dad. At 2 a.m., Betty burst in with 2 security guards, claiming I was disturbing other patients by making noise. I'd been sitting silently, holding Dad's hand while he slept, but Betty was convincing, and I was escorted out like a troublemaker. She was systematically cutting me off from my dying father, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it, or so I thought. The morning after Dad's funeral, Betty waltzed into the kitchen like she'd just won the lottery. She was jangling the house keys like a jailer, and her grief performance from yesterday had completely vanished. "Sweetie, we need to have a little chat about your living situation," she announced, settling into Dad's favorite chair at the breakfast table, Mom's antique oak table that had been in our family for 3 generations. "This house belongs to me now," she said, "and honestly, I think it's time you spread your wings and found your own place." She slid a formal eviction notice across the table, already filled out in her perfect cursive handwriting and dated the day after the funeral. She'd prepared this before Dad was even in the ground. "I'm giving you 30 days, which is more generous than I need to be," Betty continued, examining her manicured nails like we were discussing the weather. "And frankly, dear, you're a reminder of a past I'd rather leave behind. Ronnie and I had our own life together, and it's time I moved forward without complications." What broke my heart wasn't the eviction notice. It was seeing her sitting there in my mother's kitchen, wearing my mother's pearl necklace and ruby earrings, calling me a reminder of the past. This woman had spent 3 years systematically erasing me from my father's life, and now she was literally erasing me from my childhood home. I stared at Betty Martinez, this woman who'd played the loving stepmother while poisoning every relationship I had, and something cold and calculating settled in my chest. She wanted a competition about who belonged in this house? Fine. I wouldn't just participate, I would demolish her. I smiled back sweetly and said, "We'll see about that." The confidence in her eyes flickered for just a moment, and I knew she was wondering what I meant. She should have been worried. She should have been terrified. Because I was about to destroy her entire world in less than 24 hours. I spent the next 24 hours strategically digging through every document Dad had ever given me. That's when I remembered the manila envelope he'd handed me 2 years ago, the one marked open only if absolutely necessary in his careful block letters. I'd tucked that envelope away in my memory box and honestly forgotten about it. Dad had been acting strange that day, more serious than usual, and he'd made me promise to keep it safe but not open it unless something terrible happened. At 17, I thought he was being overly dramatic. Now I realized he'd been preparing for war. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope and found 3 life-changing documents inside, along with a letter in Dad's handwriting that made my blood run cold. If you're reading this, it means Betty has shown her true colors, and I'm no longer here to protect you. I've been watching her behavior for the past year, and I know exactly what kind of person she is. I've seen how she treats you when she thinks I'm not looking, and I've documented everything. These papers will give you the power to fight back. Use them wisely. I love you more than life itself. Dad. The first document was a deed transfer, signed and notarized, showing that Dad had quietly transferred the house into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary, dated 2 years ago, right after Betty's mask had started slipping around him, too. The second was a prenuptial agreement that Betty had signed, limiting her to only the personal property she'd brought into the marriage, plus one vehicle. She'd been so eager to marry Dad that she'd sign away any claim to his assets. The third was a notarized statement from Dr. Williams, Dad's longtime physician, confirming that Ronald Thompson was of completely sound mind and under no duress when he created the trust and made these legal arrangements. Betty was so confident in her manipulation that she'd never seen this coming. She thought she'd played the perfect game, but Dad had been playing chess while she was playing checkers. I spent hours organizing the documents, highlighting the relevant sections, and preparing for the most satisfying conversation of my life. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen where Betty was sipping coffee from Mom's favorite mug and scrolling through real estate listings on her iPad, probably planning to sell the house before my 30 days were up. "Betty," I said, setting my own coffee down and taking the seat across from her, "you were absolutely right yesterday. Someone definitely needs to move out of this house." She looked up with that smug smile, thinking I was about to beg for more time or negotiate some pathetic deal. "I'm so glad you're being mature about this. I knew you'd come around and see reason." "Oh, I see everything very clearly now," I replied, placing the deed on the table between us. "This is my house. It has been for 2 years. Betty's expression shifted from smug to confused to absolutely horrified as she snatched the paper and read it frantically. Her hands shook as she processed the legal language, her face draining of color like someone had pulled a plug. "This can't be right," she whispered, reading the same paragraph over and over. "I was his wife. I have rights. This is impossible." "You have rights," I agreed, sliding the prenuptial agreement across the table with the relevant sections highlighted in bright yellow. "You have the right to the personal property you brought into the marriage, plus that Honda Accord Dad bought you last Christmas. That's it." Betty's coffee mug crashed to the floor as she grabbed the prenup with both hands, scanning the document that she'd signed so carelessly 3 years ago. The legal terminology was clear and brutal. She was entitled to nothing from Dad's estate except what she'd specifically brought into the marriage. "You little," she hissed, her perfect stepmother mask finally completely shattered. "You've been planning this the whole time, haven't you? Playing the innocent stepdaughter while plotting behind my back." I shook my head calmly. "I didn't plan anything, Betty. Dad planned this. He knew exactly what kind of person you are, and he protected me from you even after death." She stood up so violently that her chair crashed backward. "I'll contest this. I'll hire the best lawyers in Chicago. There's no way this will hold up in court." That's when I pulled out the final document, Dr. Williams' notarized statement confirming Dad's mental competency when he created the trust. "Go ahead and try," I said, meeting her furious gaze. "But you'll need to do it from somewhere else. I want you out of my house by tomorrow evening. And honestly, Betty, that's more generous than you deserve." Betty started crying ugly, manipulative sobs that she'd probably used to get her way her entire life. Within seconds, she was wailing about family loyalty and Christian forgiveness, playing every emotional card in her deck. "Where will I even go? I gave up everything for your father. I have nowhere to turn," she sobbed, reaching for my hands like we were long-lost sisters instead of mortal enemies. "Surely we can work something out. I'll be a better stepmother, I promise." But I was already on my phone, calling Anderson Locksmith to schedule an emergency rekey for that afternoon. "Hi, this is Thompson at 847 Maple Street. I need all my locks changed today." "Yes, it's an emergency situation." Betty's sobs turned to rage as she realized I wasn't falling for her performance. "You can't do this to me. What would your father think? What would your precious mother think about you throwing family out on the street?" "My mother would think I'm finally standing up for myself," I replied, watching the locksmith's van pull into our driveway. "And Dad? Dad orchestrated this whole thing. He knew you'd show your true colors the moment he was gone." By 6 o'clock that evening, Betty's designer luggage was stacked on the front lawn like an upscale yard sale. She stood in the driveway, screaming about family values and Christian charity while our neighbors watched from their windows like it was premium cable television. "This isn't over," she shrieked, loading her Coach bags into her Honda. "I'll take you to court. I'll expose what a manipulative little witch you really are. Everyone will know the truth." "The truth?" I called back from the front porch. "The truth is that you married a dying man for his money, tortured his daughter for 3 years, and thought you were smart enough to get away with it. How'd that work out for you, Betty?" She screamed profanities that would make a sailor blush, cursing both me and Dad's memory before peeling out of the driveway in a cloud of burning rubber and wounded pride. The next morning, I found her eviction notice in the recycling bin and had it professionally framed. It now hangs in my home office as a reminder that sometimes the universe delivers perfect justice, you just have to be patient enough to let it unfold. Betty told me to find my own place. Turns out, I already had. As I sat in my newly reclaimed house, I thought about Rachel, the ex-wife who'd betrayed me, and how her cheating had taught me to recognize deception. In a weird way, that pain prepared me for this moment. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to see through people's masks, and to stand up for myself when it mattered most. And now, thanks to Dad's foresight and my own determination, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But the scars of betrayal run deep. Rachel and Betty may have been different people, but they shared one thing in common: they underestimated me. They thought I was weak, naive, easy to manipulate. What they didn't realize was that each betrayal made me stronger. Each lie they told forced me to grow thicker skin, to sharpen my instincts, to become someone who wouldn't back down when the odds were stacked against me. And now, sitting in the house that was rightfully mine, surrounded by memories of my parents and the life I'd fought so hard to reclaim, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from facing it head-on and emerging victorious. Betty and Rachel had tried to take everything from me: my trust, my dignity, my home, but in the end, they gave me something far more valuable: the strength to fight back.